Nick, well, I want to start by saying that I hope you remember that I reached out to you personally through LinkedIn because I saw an article, and I think it was an interview with Fox as well, in which, and I was not shocked to hear about that, but you said that China is basically beating the United States in the AI race and also cyber warfare. So before we
Mhm.
go into that, which is, I think, the most important topic because it impacts all our lives, business, governments all over the world. Before we go into that, I want you to be a thought leader and explain to our audience, the evolution of, cybersecurity, the biggest disruptions in cybersecurity, maybe from 20 years back till now, how it has evolved, pre-pandemic, the lessons from the pandemic, how vulnerable the world became, during the pandemic and many things. And then we'll go into that race and talent and the way forward for the United States and the world in terms of cybersecurity. So if you can give us just a little background first on the evolution in the last 20 years of cybersecurity and its biggest disruptors.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that the first piece to understand is kind of the evolution of technology and kind of the adoption of technology inside of our lives. And really that kind of drove up the importance of cybersecurity. A few years back, you wouldn't believe that we're so dependent on technology and that most innovations are what we call software defined, meaning software is kind of leading the innovation. And you see it, with pretty much every market. You look at companies like Tesla that are able to update, the existing cars without swapping, the hardware and upgrade software over the air, right? All these kind of expectation of customers getting access to newer, better things, and not just, software updates, but really new features, new capabilities, moving at a pace of relevance that's just so accelerated compared to what you used to see in terms of velocity 10, 20 years ago. That kind of compounded the problem of, okay, we need to move fast. We need to move all the way faster to compete and be relevant. So we're not gone tomorrow and not be complacent to compete with other companies all over the world and kind of internet, kind of remove the barriers of the nations, right? And so now you have a company in Israel capable of, innovating in cyber faster than ever before. And U.S. companies have no choice but to compete, and they just can't hide behind what used to be kind of the different frontiers. And so that kind of compounded the problem with cyber, because we used to pretty much put it on the back burner compared to innovation. But then also everything got connected, right? Rise of Internet of Things, more devices in our homes, everywhere we look, more software, more updates, updates over the internet rapidly, with more and more malicious actors going after assets and identities and, online banking. All of that kind of created this kind of set of conditions that ended up compounding the problem with cybersecurity. And quite honestly, the investment in cybersecurity has not been great over the years, but it's now even worse because we're so dependent on software, and we realize that pretty much every company is getting some front page story on getting breached, often quite honestly getting away with the real impact. You see some dip in their stock market, but it's not significant. And even when you see, malicious actors going after the oil pipeline in the U.S., water, power grid, you've seen Russia going after Ukrainian, critical infrastructure, all these things, space satellites, right? With a recent attack, by Ukraine against Viasat and then against, Starlink. Really, cyber became kind of the only way to differentiate yourself and also an enabler to your business. If you have too much technology debt and you're stuck in time and you're not able to react to what's going on in the world, you realize that you have no chance to succeed.
You said something very important. You can have all the technology in the world, but if you are not ready to jump, and to react right away, do you see that often in many companies that they have the technology, or in governments that they have it, but they don't know just how to react? Is that part of the cyber culture? Because people are not trained enough to react. They can have the technology, but they don't have the chip of preventing things much more
Right.
in the future, right?
Yeah, I think that the issue with people is, we're often too reactive. Very few people understand the importance of proactivity and being able to proactively invest in cyber before it's too late. And it's not a if, but when that you're gonna see cyber attacks, and potentially a breach. So if it's a when, the question is, do you want to proactively mitigate the damage and invest in your business? And people used to get away with things for many years, and I think kind of the people's expectation is getting more and more handsy to address it, and you see even Congress starting to talk about potentially pretty significant laws to go after board members, C-level executives that just didn't invest what they should have been investing in cyber defense. And when you see hacking groups like Lapsus in the recent weeks going after, Microsoft, Samsung, and Okta, and all these companies within weeks, targeting some of the largest organizations on the planet, and setting the source code, setting the IP, it's beyond the basic ransomware, right? You've seen the cost of the NotPetya hack of Russia going after Ukraine. They end up spreading, of course, outside of Ukraine and costing 1.2 billion to U.S. companies. That was just an accident spread. That wasn't like a targeted attack. Imagine if one day, and that's kind of the thing with, nation states. We have cyber offense capabilities. It's kind of a one-time thing. When you use it, you don't want to waste it. But if you use it, you're going to want it to be impactful and use it at the right time, because you can't use it again. And so, the reason why Russia has not been using some of their cyber offensive capabilities is also because if they do it against Ukraine, first, it's not that important right now to them, but also, it would spread and start hitting NATO countries, the U.S., and then that would open the door for, those nations to react and potentially push back and fight back. So, the cyber landscape is nation states, it's hacking groups, it's, kids in his basement, right?
I actually want to address that, because cyber law, you were just mentioning that Congress is getting, more effective at going after companies and people. But cyber law, I read something that said, an article, I don't remember who said it, but it said, even in wars in World War II and after World War II, there are rules, and some things that decry that it's a war crime. In the cyber world, and law, where does it all fit in? Because we don't see cyber law, we don't see cohesion throughout the world. And I think that some powers around the world don't want that cohesion so that they can remain competitive in their cyber warfare objectives and objectives, basically. What do you think of cyber law and how it has advanced, actually?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of understanding, though, in terms of like the fact that, cyber attack is now recognized as an act of war. So that's already like a first step, right? So now nations agree on principle that a cyber attack is an act of war. The issue is if the cyber attack, we think it's Russia behind it, or we think it's attributed to China. That's great, but the fact is, I can tell you, attribution is very sensitive, because it's pretty easy to pretend you're somebody else, right? And so, particularly nation state, Russia or China can pretend all day to be North Korea or Russia or somebody else, right? So, we have hints and things, but it's very debatable whether or not you can really say, yeah, this is really this nation state behind it. So then if you can't do that, then you can never prove that it was indeed Russia. And so then it's not an act of war, because you don't know who did it. So no one so far said, well, not only we have dozens of attacks every day, and the FBI has been raising, the alarm in terms of the volume of attacks we see coming from China, for example, against U.S. companies and the U.S. government. But despite that, they get away with it, because often it's done by groups that are in China or with Chinese, individuals, but they are not directly, tied to the CCP, or they're just a hacking group that the country kind of sponsors unofficially, and they kind of get away with it, and they're not, of course, held accountable.
True.
And you see a lot of that, and those same groups all let loose, right, to go after different targets, and they have a kind of a deal to say, hey, if you go after U.S. companies, we let you get the ransomware money, but you have to share all the stuff you take from those companies back to the CCP. That's a great way to steal IP and not have to invest, right? So when you're competing, if you invest billions in research and it takes 10 minutes for China to come and steal it, that's a pretty bad deal for the company.
Right. And you mentioned something, and like you said, it could be anyone in their basement. And I don't know if you remember a movie, very, very famous, War Games, came out in 1988. Yeah. I'm 46 years. You remember that movie, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So this kid was actually moving things. He cracked the code to get into the Pentagon, and then they asked him to help them to do something else, correct? So it could be anyone. But moving forward, so how has the role of the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, changed throughout the years? And how difficult of a task is it now to be a CIO in any corporation?
Well, it's kind of a balancing act between enabling innovation and research and delivering capabilities to your end user multiple times a day in production, not in a freaking lab, right? So tangible outcomes, be able to do it rapidly and get feedback and learn and fail fast, learn fast, don't fail twice for the same reason. So it's a balance between that and baked-in security, cyber protection, compliance, which, compliance to me is less important as long as you're secure. But usually if you're secure, you're compliant, but, whatever. And so it's kind of that balancing act, right? And they're polar opposite, right? You can be very secure if you turn off your laptop and you never touch a computer again. I'm not sure you're going to be able to innovate and do anything meaningful. But obviously that would be the most secure state you could get to, right? And so what is the balance between cyber and innovation and software and digital transformation and all these things? You have to worry about, securing your data, more and more compliance requirements, with GDPR and all these laws in terms of data protection. But it's also like creating the culture of innovation. You look at companies like SpaceX, right? They're awesome at saying, look, we're going to fail. We're going to fail a lot. And if we don't fail 80%, that means we're not innovating enough. There's kind of this complacency in the US, unfortunately, because we've been leading for so long, particularly in the government, but even for some, large Fortune 500 that become complacent, right? And they stop innovating. And the only way to innovate really is to buy companies. That's just a very tough situation to be in, because I find that, companies that just buy these startups often have a tough time integrating their products into the broader ecosystem of the company, end up pretty much ruining the purchase, the M&A transaction. And then you see, often the talent from the startup wait to vest their exit and then leave. And then so what? You didn't change or improve your long-term situation. You fail at creating a culture of innovation and keeping people excited to retain them and attract talent. So it's a balance between culture, innovation, investing in people. I used to give an hour a day to my people to learn, right? We had 100,000 people in the Air Force, Space Force, DoD to build software, 60 billion budget, probably the largest organization on the planet. I mean, not probably, it is the largest organization on the planet. So with probably the most silos and the most complex mission and the largest bureaucracy on the planet with the largest funding and everything, right? So when you start looking at that, you have all the impediments that would, guarantee any organization, excuse me, to fail. But at the same time, you want to find the balance between, I'm going to drink, sorry.
Just go ahead, please take your time.
So you have to find the balance between that, breaking the silos, creating the culture, investing in people. So with the pace of IT, people fail at investing into their own people, and even investing in yourself. I find most CIOs to be less and less technical, more and more, managers with no understanding of the tech stack. That's concerning. They are
Really?
managers. Yeah, I mean, many of the CIOs I know, I mean, they are somewhat technical, but they are not impressively technical. I think investing in yourself and learning and really we're moving to this kind of continuous learning model, because the velocity of IT is such that you can't just go to a seminar once a year and think you're up to date. It's continuous. It's LinkedIn, it's videos, it's YouTube. It's keeping up with what's going on, and it's tough to find the time. And I find most people don't invest in creating that time for them to learn.
The time, sure. I remember something that Robert Herjavec said, actually, and Mary, I'm sure you remember. He said, it's very difficult to protect everything. And one of the major issues in companies is that we have human beings who have not been properly trained, do not understand the culture, like you said, and do not carry that chip that needs to trickle down through the entire organization so that no one leaves any door open for any attack, right? So let's talk just quickly. You mentioned many best practices that companies should follow, but if you could narrow it down to, let's say, is there like a percentage of an income of a company annual that they should be spending on cybersecurity? What are the best practices, and how do you effectively train a corporation so that it trickles down and everyone understands that it's part of the culture?
Yeah, so there's a few things, right? I think the percentages, that's a mythical number. It changes per market, per company sizes. I'm not going to try to pretend there is a magical number. You want it to be significant, and I think you want it to be a little bit painful. If it's not painful to the organization, that means you're probably not doing enough. Okay, so that's that. No magical number. Now you want it to be security driven, not compliance driven. Meaning, people love checklists and check boxes and feel good about themselves, but it's really technical. And so you need very deep technical expertise. You need to create what we call baked-in security. So it's baked into the processes. It's not an afterthought. So you have to have all the enterprise services, all the capabilities to enable teams to piggyback on top of these things, to create innovation on top of that, between cloud and DevSecOps and all the things you need to have to build software in 2022 and beyond. So you need to have all these foundational elements of zero trust and all these technical things you need to have baked in, and you need to bring it at the enterprise layer. So not every team has to worry about every piece of the puzzle, because it's just not scalable. If you let everybody have to create the entire cyber stack from scratch for every team you have on the planet, it's not going to scale. Mm-hmm. So you want to bring enterprise services, you want to bring a proper training, proper education. It's also a matter of making it so it's not painful to the companies to consume it. It has, to some degree, every cyber control creates an impact on the user experience and the day-to-day lives of people. There's a balance there. If you try to be too secure and you forget about user experience of your employees and your customers, then they're going to try to cheat the system and create shadow IT and kind of bypass your cyber stuff, and then they're going to create more problems. So it's just what's the right balance where you can make a laptop a brick that's unusable but it's very secure, but no one is going to use it. Or you can make it usable with the right cyber security stuff, right? We kind of did the former in the Air Force at first, and the devices had so much cyber stuff on it that they would fight, all these cyber tools would fight with each other and kind of slow down and take 80% of the device memory and compute, and it would slow down and no one could use it. And then people would start using their personal devices, and that creates a whole set of nightmares, So you're just like setting the right desired outcomes, tracking it, monitoring it, tracking your assets, right? So it's a set of behavior and training you set. And look, if the security is really baked in and built from within, it's going to be pretty difficult for people to bypass it, which means you don't have to train everybody to really understand all the aspects of cyber. You just have to train them enough to not create more problems. and it's part of investing in people, right? And of course, depending on the organization, any IT organization, it's really easier because they have a lot of IT talent in the organization, right? So any kind of software, cloud company, whatever, right? They have the right talent. But even those, you'll be surprised to see some of the actual cyber companies selling cyber products have the worst cyber posture for their own company. When they're trying to sell cyber products, it's just, we did assessments in the Air Force. I was, accrediting software for DoD use, and looking at 750 products in 2 years. And I can tell you some of the worst product were software companies that were selling cyber products. You would think it's kind of almost incredible to have someone selling you a cyber products, which often if something goes wrong with these products, then the malicious actor get a massive foothold in your network, because cyber products run with elevated privileges and they have access to many things in your system. So these kind of products getting targeted, of course, more and more. You see it with SolarWinds recently getting breached, but pretty much every cyber product is becoming the prime target of Russia and China, because if they hack one company, effectively they hack hundreds of thousands of companies using these cyber products.
Because that's kind of like the piggyback riding on. Once you're in,
it's a ripple effect.
Okay, got it. And that's very scary. So let's go into the China-US race, AI and cyberspace. Let's go into that. Why is the US losing that battle or that war? And what has happened? Does it have to do with budget, planning, talent, complacency, like you said, all of the above? What's going on?
Well, so sorry, say that again, just to make sure I understood the question.
Yeah, the main reason was to know why the US is losing that battle.
I see. Okay, now I got it.
These elements of why. Is it talent?
Right,
budget,
yeah.
complacency,
Got it. Well, there's two things, right? The US companies are leading in cyber and AI and ML, right? So the US companies are leading compared to the Chinese companies. The issue, what people don't understand, is the US government does not have access to the US companies. And so many US companies refuse to do business with DoD because it's either too slow or expensive or time consuming, right? And it's or many, unfortunately, are kind of tied to the woke mentality of like anti-military, and they don't realize that the freedom we enjoy is because of the sacrifices of the military personnel, right? And so they live in the Silicon Valley bubble, just like there's a DoD bubble too, right? But it's both of them are very toxic, right? I think there's a middle ground somewhere. And so what you see is companies refusing to work with the US government, so we don't have access to the best of breed technology. And in the meantime, China, of course, mandates their company to work with them, and so they have access to their best of breed technology. So that puts the government ahead of us, which the nation that's going to be controlling AI ML is going to be controlling the planet. You've seen it in many things, in hypersonic quantum compute, but also things like we put AI on the jet, and every single time, and it was a basic AI, not even advanced stuff, and every single time we did exercises, the US pilots, best US pilots, lost against the AI every single time. So AI capabilities are capable of doing things the human brain cannot even comprehend. So how do you compete if you don't understand what's going on? And so, when you look at implementation of AI inside of weapons, which, there's a whole debate, of course, about ethics. And I'm not saying we want to do it in a vacuum with no ethics and just do a bunch of nonsense. But there is a balance between just talking about ethics all day, and 80% of the funding of DoD was spent, on ethics reports instead of actual AI capabilities. And so I think the better balance would be more like 80% on the research innovation side and 20% on the ethics side, with real outcomes for the warfighter. And we don't have to go to AI weapons, right? There's plenty of things we can use AI to start doing better information gathering, analysis, predictive things that could have helped Ukraine, that could have helped the debacle in Afghanistan where we bombed, the 7 kids in the bus, where if we had better AI to recognize and track the imagery of satellites, we could have told people that, hey, there's 7 kids in this truck. Do you really want to bomb it? So,
Right.
people, refuse often to work with the government, saying, well, we don't want to, build weapons. We don't want to kill people. Well, I can tell you by companies like Google that walked away from the DoD 2 years ago to build better AI image recognition, could have potentially prevented those people from dying. So I would argue they could have saved lives by partnering with us. Instead, we ended up killing the wrong people. So it's not just about killing; it's also about saving and making better decisions. Enabling the warfighter to have more insights. There's plenty of things that you can do with AI that's not going to touch a weapon, and we're not doing barely any of it. But you also look at hypersonic. China launched 200 missiles, test missiles in hypersonics. We launched 9. It's a disgrace. It's shameful. We have no capability to stop those missiles if they start targeting us. The only way to stop a hypersonic missile will be to use AI defense capabilities to launch, missiles to stop the missile. And because of the ability of the missile to react to what's going on, you need AI to fight against AI. It's literally AI fighting against AI to stop each other, right? If you have no AI, I can tell you there's just no way in hell you're going to do anything, because the AI is going to avoid you and you're going to be left in the dust. So, this is putting an existential threat to the nation. This is things that, is as bad as having no nuclear weapon. We don't want to use them. It's a deterrence, but we need it, and we need to be strong and have it. Not being behind in hypersonic, being behind in AI, being behind in quantum compute, where, that's potentially going to crack all crypto that we're using. That is putting the nation and our kids at risk.
What do you mean it's going to crack all crypto that we know?
The quantum compute is able to effectively compute things that would take hundreds of years, if not millions of years, with current CPUs. And with quantum compute, that would take few hours, few days. It's not there yet, but it's coming. And so whoever is going to be leading in quantum will be able to crack crypto.
Who is
that means
leading
cracking China.
China, totally.
It's interesting, right? It's always the same thing. The U.S. companies are leading, but because we don't have it in the government, then the government is behind, and then China is behind in terms of the companies, but not too far behind, pretty close. But the CCP has it. So the CCP, doesn't care about ethics, right? They care about control and using it for their own desire. And I wouldn't be surprised that you start seeing this kind of stuff in Taiwan.
You mentioned something very important. I think, some companies don't want to work with the government DoD because of many reasons you mentioned. I don't know if you know, but we also interviewed Preston Dunlop. He talked about the space economy. So we focused on him on space economy. What is it? The Space Force. So a lot of people 3-4 years ago were asking, why do we need a Space Force? And now we understand, it's defense, it's many things, right? But one thing that we talked about was how appealing it is for kids, students today in colleges to go, whoa, I want to work for the government. No, it's not true. Most of them, the younger, even millennials said, no, I don't want to. Generation X said, yes, we want to. It would be great. But now Generation Z is saying, no, I want to save the world. And then that's what he said, well, you can save the world if you actually are part of the DoD and government institutions that help provide these cybersecurity, air defense systems, and all these things. So let me ask you something. Is there a talent gap, a talent problem versus other countries, and a talent desire to come into these sectors and to work with government? Is there a problem here in the US with talent gap and talent desire to be willing to grow a population of more digitally native people and more inclined to, working with government and knowing that this will help America?
Yeah, without a doubt. So there's multiple pieces of that, right? The first piece is you see China investing, starting 7 years old, in their kids to learn, AI and software innovation and stuff, right? If you look at TikTok in China, right? Which is effectively here a Chinese weapon of misinformation and brainwashing. TikTok is pushing in China, um, innovation and research and videos on, research and great, great innovation stuff, right? And here it's pushing, dance moves, right? That's not an accident. China is trying to make us dumber and make the kids, dance instead of like looking at math and AI and other things. You look at the videos promoted on TikTok in China, is not the same kind of videos, okay? And it's no accident. We can dismiss it as much as we want, but it's all done on purpose, right? And so they are very smart, right? They invest very early on. They also effectively infiltrated the U.S. Education system by pushing kind of this anti-American, thinking, where and so look, some of it is due to the fact that the Pentagon and a lot of the DoD leaders are never held accountable. You've seen it in Afghanistan, with people effectively getting away with a whole bunch of nonsense, and no one is ever held accountable, and people are tired of it. Who is going to go put your lives at risk when you know that 4-star generals can just do a bunch of nonsense and there's no consequence to them, right? That's just not fair, right? You're putting people's lives at risk, kids' lives, right? They deserve better. We deserve better. The taxpayer deserve better, right? America deserves better. So we need to just kind of lead that way and start holding people accountable, because who is going to want to go and work and fight for the country if that kind of stuff is happening, right? So I think the momentum and kind of the excitement got tremendously damaged with what happened in Afghanistan, and the way we left. We could have done a much better job with better leadership. And so there's a piece there. There's a piece of like, not investing in kids early enough, and kind of the participation trophy mentality nowadays, where kids expect, to get a trophy every time they show up, and that's just creating this wrong expectation. Life doesn't work that way, and we can pretend it's going to work that way, but it just won't. So that just creating a set of whole nightmares. And then with kind of the woke and the anti-military additional stuff on top, and anti-American, where sure, we're not perfect and we have to improve and we need to do better and whatever, right? And race and religions and all these things can improve. We're still much better than what you can see in many nations, including in Europe and including in France and including in many nations that I know and travel to. And the fact is, too few Americans travel, right? There's very few people traveling. You send those guys, those kids in California, 2 weeks in China or Venezuela, I think they're going to come back to America being pretty proud of what we're doing here. And I'm not saying we can improve it, but the fact is, all that mentality of like anti-American, changing the flags and all these kind of nonsense is pushed by countries like China to make sure that we're fighting among each other instead of fighting against them. And that just puts us behind, and they're having a good laugh on top of it, right? Because that's what's happening. Yeah. I don't know if you've seen, but even for the first time ever, I think in the last 100 years, there's like comics in Saudi Arabia saying to make fun of the U.S. and how we fight among each other, and you would have never seen this 20, 30 years ago. It's just creating like people are making fun of us. It's just ridiculous.
Well, it's becoming a mockery.
And people move on and pretend it's not happening, and we and it's all back to lack of accountability. You've seen at the Pentagon, the Joint Staff Chairman say things like, first, the Afghanistan debacle, we all know that, but then even with the hypersonic missile, he says, oh, it's almost a Sputnik moment. It's not almost a Sputnik moment. It is a Sputnik moment. By saying it's almost, you minimize, people's reaction to this. Mm-hmm. And instead of creating a momentum of people trying to come and help, and, we overclassify everything, like even the number of Chinese hacks and how many times China is trying to get into U.S. companies and, into the government, by minimizing and hiding and not, being transparent. with the Americans in terms of what's going on, we're putting the nation at risk, because I believe most Americans and most US companies would want to participate more actively if they knew what I've seen and how bad it is. They just don't know. They live in the bubble of Silicon Valley, whatever, right? And we don't tell them how bad it is. And then we call it almost a Sputnik moment, when really it is a Sputnik moment. It's as bad as this, but we just dismiss it because it's convenient.
True. I wanted to go back to one thing, because the reason, one of the university presidents that we interviewed, University of Illinois, Chicago, Michael Amarides, and also the president of the Illinois Institute of Technology, they both said, you know, we are two universities that produce many computer science majors in the nation, probably two of the by volume, the biggest ones. But there's a gap, there's a deficit. We're only graduating, I think, 95,000 computer science majors and people who will end up being in cybersecurity, software development, and all these things. And the current need and demand is
10x.
135,000 minimum. And that's what I want to ask you, because I read all these things and I'm not sure what to believe, but I know that there's a gap.
Oh yeah.
Is there a real gap? Why is there that gap? And they say that it's to be able to automate and do all the digital transformation that all companies in the United States need. For that demand, we need around 60,000 more graduates a year in computer science. Is there?
But that's ignoring that the gap, the existing gap of like 1.2 million people we already have today. So there's 1.2 million people we need that we don't have, plus another 120,000 a year on top of that every year. So it's way more than that, right?
So how is the US addressing that? And I ask you because we had a huge article on the new workforce, on the talent gap. And, you know, I interviewed, for example, Randstad Corporation, $37 billion staffing agency, the largest in the world out of the Netherlands. Yep. The CEO said, Marco, quote unquote, we have to do nearshore and we have to outsource, you know, from all over the world. And that's the future, because just to put it like this, in the US, we don't have enough people. And I said, but some people say it's because they don't want to pay $157,000 a year to an entry-level software engineer. And that many companies are refusing that and you know, outsourcing. What is the debacle there? What is really happening?
Well, I can tell you, we fail at reinventing education. And I'm not just saying this because I don't have a degree, because I created my company, I was 15, and I only have a high school diploma.
You know, can I say something about that? I was going to say, you're the most humble person that I've met, because, you know, when we meet people like you, as sophisticated in cyber warfare and software engineering and all these things, usually we see like 3 PhDs from MIT, and we see like from Indian Institute of Management and 35 degrees and awards. And I only saw one little thing that didn't even have an icon right there. Right?
I don't know if it's I don't know if it's humble. Maybe I'm just incompetent. I don't know. I'm just kidding.
No, you're not. Well,
no, but you know, honestly, in IT and particularly in cyber, I mean, the best people I know are self-taught, you know, and degrees all help and, you know, are great, you know, to have on your resume. But the fact is, you know, I was offered an honorary PhD that I refused because first, I don't see the value in it. And two, I feel bad when people spend so much money and spend years to get a PhD and they would just give it to me for free. That just makes no sense. So I said no. But when you look at university, I've been trying to help universities, large universities for years with their curriculum in DevSecOps, innovation, you know, cyber. Most of those refuse to even update their curriculums more than, you know, 5 years, sometimes 3 years at best, where I tell them like, it has to be every year, you know, and they refuse to do that. So I just stop helping them, because honestly, it's a scam. You're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to get an education, and companies like Google had to create their own training because they hire, you know, people coming out of universities and have to spend a year to educate them on the right things they should be knowing that they don't know, because universities are so far behind. And quite honestly, you know, unfortunately, what you see is a lot of the professors are nice and whatever, but the fact is the best ones are not teaching. The best innovators are innovating. And so you end up with Team F teaching students to become the next Team A of, you know, innovation, and it just doesn't work. And it's too expensive, and it's kind of stuck in time. Instead of focusing on teaching kids how to learn, which is what I've done. I created my first, I started coding at 7. I created my first game at was 12, made 50K. With that money, I created my first company. I was 15. I was the youngest French entrepreneur in history. And then created 12 companies, right? And I'm 37 now. So but I did all this because I can learn without having to go to school or have a teacher. And we're not teaching kids this, and with the velocity of IT, the best engineers will always be whoever is able to learn and continuously do that multiple times a day and keep up. And so we need to completely change the way universities are even thinking of the curriculums and the training and the velocity of updating these curriculums and giving like online tools and learning how. COVID kind of pushed them to like wake up and go from like the 60s to maybe the 2000s, right? And start bringing like a portal where you have access to content and video, video chats. But that was like 2000 kind of, year old stuff. That's, there's so much more you could be doing. There was never a Uber, kind of transformation of education. That's probably the most market the only market left where there was no major disruption of the way the market, thinks and behaves. And that's probably the most important one, right? Because we need it, so.
If you could just give us a little bit of how you see the world in terms of how competitive other countries are, and not to put them in ranks, but I own a company, and the chief technology officer of that company, I asked him, Diego, he's Mexican, I'm Mexican. So I asked him, he's a software engineer and he's really good at traceability and I don't understand those things. He really tells me, but I keep wondering. And I asked him,
that's why you have him.
Yeah, what makes the Mexican engineer, a software engineer, competitive in the market? Because he's been working with Russians, Belarusians, Americans, Chinese, from India, from everywhere. He said, I think our personality, the curiosity that we have inside, and the team playing kind of like we want to solve, we won't drop it. Once there's a team, that commitment and the curiosity, he mentions a lot of times curiosity. And when you take a learning aspect, is that what makes let's say a people from one country more adept to software developing skills, like the curiosity? Because I said I always thought it was math, physics, and people who are really
no, it's not.
all those things. So what makes a great, like you said, what makes
I'm not that great in math, so it can be that. So I can tell you that. I'm not bad, but I'm not. Yeah, I think it's too. I guess curiosity is great, right? I agree. I think it's also like being open to understanding the world and like learning and passion, right? Too many engineers nowadays pick the job because it pays well, or like it's going to be a good way to make money. I remember an interview I had maybe 10 years ago where the developer said, I don't even have a laptop at home. And I was like, what are you saying? I've never heard of this in my life. Of course, we didn't hire him, but it's just scary, right? He had no passion. He couldn't care less. He was just doing this to make money, and that's not a good fit. And so you see a lot of the kids becoming engineers or more like developers or software engineers have no passion, and so that makes it tough to learn. But also in America, so many people don't travel. They've never been outside of the country. They have no diverse backgrounds in terms of what's going on in the world. They will say that the U.S. is not good, but they have no clue how bad it is elsewhere. It's back to the other point, right? It's like, send them to China, send them to, so they actually see the real, not the tourist stuff, but the real daily life of people. I think they're going to change their mind pretty quick. And I think that's what you guys do in Europe probably a lot, because it's so small and everybody can go across different nations, but also in Latin America, right? I think, I had an office in Panama, Mexico. So I could tell like people travel, they want to see what's going on. They they have a culture, and then there's the passion. I mean, I guess curiosity is passion for me. It's kind of the same. If you don't have the passion, usually you're not going to be curious about stuff usually, right? So I think it's kind of both. But yeah, it's very subjective, right? What's for sure, it's not just like IQ or like math skills or, in fact, being an engineer in software nowadays is getting easier and easier, because you don't have to go low level programming like we used to like 20, 30 years ago. It's getting easier and easier, right? A lot of tools make life easy, right? It doesn't take a mathematical genius. Now, if you're going to start doing SpaceX level coding, okay, but if you're going to build some website or web app, pretty much anyone can do this. There's no special skill,
Yeah, so you said you were in Panama and in Mexico. What was your opinion of the talent or in Mexico, for example? Because I do know that Mexico has thousands of engineers, but Panama doesn't. So that's why I'm asking you about Mexico. What do you think of talent in Mexico?
Yeah, I was shocked with the difference actually between Panama and Mexico.
Why so?
It felt like, Panama was pretty much deploying technology that was like 5 years or 7 years behind the U.S. Stuff like Open Table and like I remember like they were releasing.
What
like,
year were you
Open
in Panama?
I was that was maybe 5 years ago.
Okay.
No, because both
4 years.
Marco and I lived in Panama City, in Panama for some time.
I mean, I had an office there. I didn't live there, but I had an office, so I would go, 3-4 times a year. I had 12 countries. So I had Dubai, 7 in Europe, 3 in the US, and then Canada, and then Panama and Mexico. So I travel way too much. But I mean, the people were. I like a lot of people in Panama, right? But they were not. It just felt like they were lagging behind. I didn't feel that in Mexico as much, right? I felt like they were more. I mean, they were a little bit behind the U.S., right? But maybe a year, not like 7 years,
Sure. Okay.
I can't explain it. I have no clue why, but that's what I've seen. Yeah.
Well, one of the major reasons is the educational system between Panama and Mexico, and Mexico's proximity and the sheer size and the economy to U.S. But that's
what I was gonna expect, and the ability to be so close to the U.S.
Oh, I mean,
I still don't know why they were so far. I mean, 7 years was a lot. I mean, there were some stuff I was like, wow, this is pretty bad. I was trying to sell stuff that were pretty innovative, and they were so far behind. It was like they couldn't even understand what I was talking about. They were so far behind.
I know, and I guess the simple answer to that is this: Mexico has a huge automotive sector and also a space sector in Querétaro. So for the last, space for the last 10 years, 15 years has been training a pool of thousands of engineers in Mexico, and it's trickled down. And the automotive sector has been there for 30 plus years. So those two, I guess, requires high-tech engineering and, a lot of trickle-down effects from bosses that come from all over the world and give their knowledge and more engineers. And so Mexico has had a lot of interaction with the US, and that's why. Panama has interaction with Florida. That's it. So that's true. That's all the interaction they have. And Panamanians, by the way, don't travel either. They only go to Miami and Mexicans too. We are very curious. We have those minds. So
that's what it is. Here we go.
I want to know if there's anything you want to shout out there to the world and to governments, people, students, anyone. What's your last message?
The key is to raise, for me to raise the alarm. We estimate that if we don't wake up by December of this year, it's going to be mathematically impossible to catch up to China because of the volume of data and the number of people they have. So it's a pretty sensitive timing we're talking about in terms of AI because of the velocity and the compounding effect of data and learning. And, when you have 1.4 billion people, we should be leading. Of course, we have less people, right? We have less data in terms of volume. So it makes it already harder, which means we should be moving faster and be, working more and harder and all these things. But we work less. They're hard worker. They're not stupid. They're actually very smart. They take data seriously. We need to start really taking real look at data law. You look at Shanghai. They created the Shanghai Data Exchange where they can sell data, and all the companies, even in Europe, are stupid enough to sell their data there, which gives full access to the CCP, right? So they're ingesting massive volumes of data In the meantime, we have no legal protection at all in the US when it comes to data and data privacy. And we don't even really start to understand, we don't even understand both the Department of Commerce, Department of State, and really the government as a whole, the importance of data, and it's very scary because you see China leading the pack with this data exchange. That was a very small, they are small, they're not waiting for us to figure it out. And with the volume of people they got, time is now, and the goal is for me to raise awareness of kind of the urgency for companies to start, collaborating with the government and changing that mindset of toxicity against Americans within each other, and between parties, and all this partisan stuff, to push it more against what China is trying to do, which is really they are at war with us. They say openly that they want to take the world over, and yet we have this complacency where we just don't do much to prevent it.
It reminds me of one thing, and this is my last comment. I saw a documentary on CNN, I think like 10 years ago, and it shocked me. It was a scenario of 90 days without gas or gasoline in the United States. And it documented week by week the scenarios of how people would react, right? And I don't remember if it was week 6 or 7, where people were pulling the from the gas stations, they were pulling tanks and stuff, ripping everything apart, just like we saw, with riots and, manifestations all over the US a couple of years ago.
Sure.
That was pretty scary. Well, this
it's much worse. I can tell you, this is much worse. The actual stuff we did at DHS, when I was at DHS, within 10 days, people start killing each other with no power. So
that's what I was.
That CNN thing, 90 days is a dream. That there's no way people nowadays wait that long with no power, no electricity, no cell phones, no banking, no payments, no credit cards, no, this is way worse than this. And they will lose water. You lose, if you have no power, you have no water, right? Because the way to bring water, you need pumps, and it's just like the ripple effects would be disastrous. Way more than.
You know what's funny? And just to end this, I think if the world ends like that this is a joke, right? This is obviously a joke. Hopefully, it's a joke.
Yes, hopefully it's never gonna happen.
But if you look at the movie Don't Look Up, it's kind of like this, the ending. Ironically, if the world implodes because of that lack of security, the only people who are going to remain alive are the people who don't use it. And that's people in the Amazon, in the Brazil, in Peru, in the mountains of Nepal, and some places. And guess what? Civilization will start again with them.
Rebuild, reset.
Not with
so
us.
we have a few prepares. I'm pretty prepared here to stay alive for a few years without power. But
I'm sure. I'm sure there are some bunkers.
After I've seen what I've seen at DHS, I can tell you.